like to say, what I do is I get folks to talk to each other. If I can get all the right people in the organization talking to each other in a constructive way, things are going to work well. And that's very much what I've experienced at Belimo. I was fortunate coming in. It was a very healthy organization that I inherited 6 years ago. The company has always been very people-oriented, but also very process-oriented.
Just a quick reminder for you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better.
Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Made in America podcast. I am really excited to have Jim Furlong on, President of Belimo Americas. Jim, thanks so much for coming on today.
My pleasure, Ari.
Well, Jim, it's the Made in America podcast, so we always start off with the same two questions. What do you make and why do you make it?
Okay. So, Ari, what we make are devices that control the flow of water and air in buildings in order to create comfortable, safe, and energy-efficient environments.
That's awesome. And why do you guys do it?
Why do we do it? Well, number one, there's a lot of people who like to buy these things, and we're quite good at making them. It's really the only thing we focused on as a company over the last 50 years of our existence.
Wow, that's awesome. And Jim, we talked about this before. I want to start off. I don't think a lot of people in Connecticut know about Belimo. About almost 400 people strong, here in Danbury. Mm-hmm. This is the headquarters for all the Americas business. It's quite a large business. I know it's 2,000 employees worldwide, but really important Western Hemisphere division right here in Connecticut. So maybe we can use this opportunity to sort of introduce the company in some senses to sort of the broader manufacturing ecosystem.
Sure. So Ari, as I said, the company's been in existence for about 50 years. It was founded in 1975 in Switzerland, just a little bit east of Zurich, in a small town east of Zurich. They decided to expand sales into the U.S. in the late 1980s and literally sent one person over here with a briefcase and some catalogs to start to promote the Belimo product line to the contractors and distributors who buy these types of products in the U.S. So the story, as I understand it, is he called up a roommate of his from college who had been living in the U.S. for about 15 years and said, where should I set up? And he said, well, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. You're just doing telephone sales and face-to-face sales. I live in this town called Danbury, Connecticut. And why don't you live here? So he came over and rented a single family house and set up an office in the living room. As I understand it, the literature was kept in the bathroom, in the bathtub, and started selling product. And that grew to about 10 employees inside of a year. And then fast forward almost 40 years later, and we're sitting here with about 480 employees in Danbury. The area has served us well. We've always had a great workforce. The location is ideal for a big distribution operation like is part of what we have. So we can serve, obviously, the East Coast very well. And over the years, we've expanded to other satellite distribution organizations, or I should say distribution locations around North and South America.
That's awesome. Yeah, I apologize. Not almost 400, almost 500 employees.
That's right.
In Danbury, which is pretty exciting. Mm-hmm. So, for those of you guys that are watching, Jim was kind enough to bring a sample product here. But maybe you could sort of walk us through what does Belimo sell? I know it's represented here. Yeah. Maybe sort of start big picture, and then we can get into some of the specifics. Sure.
So as I started off saying before, we sell devices that control the flow of water and air in buildings. Okay, and specifically, there's 4 categories of devices. There's control valves, damper actuators, sensors, and meters. Okay. Now when you think of a big building, what you're doing is in most big buildings, you're using chilled water and hot water to distribute heat and to remove heat from the building.
Okay.
So when you talk about a control valve, well, that's a device that literally throttles the flow of water to areas of the building or devices in the building that don't need as much. Okay, and the same on the air side. There's always variable volumes of air being regulated throughout the building in order to keep a comfortable and healthy environment.
And so what's sort of unique or different about the Belimo product?
Okay. One of the things that we've always focused on is having a differentiated product. Okay, from the beginnings of the organization, we really concentrated on differentiating our product range on 5 different values. Basically, we have comfort. If we want to develop products that can deliver higher levels of comfort, higher levels of energy efficiency, higher levels of safety, both in the way they're installed and in the applications they serve. And an example there is we have a whole line of specialized air dampers for fire and smoke removal, or I should say smoke removal from buildings and fire suppression. Installation, we have products that we want to make very easy to install because the cost to a contractor is 3 times as much for his installation labor than it is for the product itself. So we can provide a lot of value that way. And then lastly, we want to design products that are very low maintenance, literally zero maintenance. We want the product to be installed and never have to be looked at again throughout its lifespan.
Wow. Well, I mean, zero maintenance, cheaper to install. That's pretty exciting. So I appreciate you kind of doing that introduction. That was really cool. And the background was fun too. Always exciting to kind of meet these new companies that people don't always know about that are doing great things. So I want to get back to the business and some of the differentiation. I think it's also super interesting because you're in a little bit of an oligopoly type of industry, and I think what buildings people serve and that stuff is really interesting from a marketing perspective. But I just want to take just a little bit of a step back, Jim, and go through your personal history. I know you've been with Belimo about 6 years, but how'd you get into manufacturing? Why is it so interesting or impactful? What makes you passionate about it?
Sure. So I grew up in Long Island and wanted to be an engineer. I knew that much. Didn't know what type of engineer, but went to Manhattan College in New York and elected chemical engineering as my major. And ever since I graduated, I've done everything but chemical engineering. I basically have done mechanical engineering. And just really the career opportunities from the early days. Started out in the HVAC industry, primarily working with a few different equipment manufacturers. So I kind of grew up in this business as, once I got out of school, and really have spent my entire career in the HVAC industry, primarily on the equipment side. I did do a stint in the industrial refrigeration industry, which is it's a close cousin of HVAC. And then when the opportunity to come to Belimo arose a few years back, it was a company that I knew pretty well and had a lot of respect for. So I decided to come to Belimo back in 2015.
And still not using that chemical engineering degree.
Not really using the chemical engineering degree.
So coming through all this, what's it sort of like to be running a large division for a national company? What's that like?
Well, it's a lot of fun. And, sometimes people say to me, what do you do every day? Like, what do you really do? Don't tell me the business and everything else. And I like to say, what I do is I get folks to talk to each other. If I can get all the right people in the organization talking to each other in a constructive way, things are going to work well. And that's very much what I've experienced at Belimo. I was fortunate coming in. It was a very healthy organization that I inherited 6 years ago. The company has always been very people-oriented, but also very process-oriented. So, it was my pleasure to come in and not have a lot of burning barns that I had to address because things were out of control. It was under control when I came, and I'd like to think that we've tightened it up even more, and it's continuing to be functioning well.
With such a sort of large, relatively large and pretty diverse organization, I didn't really get into it, but offices in Nevada and Ontario and in Brazil, in addition to the large contingent in Danbury. What's your sort of strategy to help break down those silos? Well, I don't know if you said silos, but to break down the walls that keep people from communicating with each other. Sometimes you see in organizations, it starts off with a little lack of communication, but sometimes that calcifies, and there's these little pockets of people that just don't talk to each other for some reason, and those can really gum up the works, even with a great process behind it.
Yeah, they absolutely can. And the way we're organized, the folks sitting in those remote locations, they're all part of a bigger organization. Okay, we don't we like to stress doing things the same way, adopting best practices and applying them everywhere, and we do a lot of that. There's a lot of best practices that we'll find that come out of our Sparks, Nevada facility or come out of our Mississauga, Ontario facility that we adopt across the company. And we're very big on employee communication. I mean, it sounds kind of old school, but every quarter we have a quarterly meeting, and it seems like years ago, but it was years ago, we used to do it in person in Danbury with some of the remote offices calling in. Obviously, the whole thing's been remote for the last 2 years, but it's very interactive. We want to bring people from the various departments. It's not just the leadership of the organization presenting. We've got some cool projects, some cool wins that we want to promote. We bring the people involved in those projects up to share the success with the whole organization. And we want it to be an open dialogue. I mean, we do a verbal question and answer at the end of each one of these things. And obviously, there's a lot of written communication. We think keeping people informed, you can't over-communicate. You cannot. And, if we'd rather err to the side of people hearing from the company too much than too little.
Yeah, one of the complaints that I don't know, I've never really heard in my career is, well, they tell us too much.
Yeah.
It just really doesn't. It really doesn't really ever happen. So in terms of the operation here in Connecticut, Jim, is there manufacturing that happens here? R&D, engineering, just distribution? Like what kind of operations are happening in Danbury?
So there's a little piece of all of those things here. Okay, so right now in Danbury, we have a manufacturing organization. It's primarily an assembly and customizing organization. We're not cutting a lot of metal in Danbury, but we're certainly doing a lot of assembly. We're putting a lot of software into customized product, and also doing the logistics function, where we'll very often take a combination of products, like what we have here with this energy valve product. It's a combination of an actuator and a flow meter and some temperature sensors, and we'll customize that product out of its core components in the Danbury facility, and then get it out the door. So our focus there is obviously on building very high quality product, but also very rapid turnaround. We're well known in the industry for being able to turn orders around in a couple of days versus the norm, which is usually 2 to 3 weeks for most of our competition. So being able to process these orders fastly and accurately and build a high quality product that's not going to have a lot of recalls, that's what we aim to do in Danbury.
So how high tech is an HVAC flow meter control thing? Like, probably a lot of people are just thinking, well, it's a piece of metal with a switch or a damper connected to it.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I would say that if you look at our product range, it kind of spans the gamut. Okay, there are still some fundamentally simple products that are built and applied in the HVAC industry. Let's say a simple damper actuator with just analog inputs and outputs. That's kind of like where the industry was in 1990, and there's still a demand for a lot of those products. So those exist in our portfolio. but that is not where the industry is going. Okay, the industry is going in the direction of products that not only can perform their basic mechanical function, an opening and closing of a valve, but also can provide a lot of data in terms of what's the flow before and after opening and closing, what's the temperature, and suddenly if you have temperature and flow, now you're measuring energy. So you have the ability with some of these more sophisticated products to be able to actually use them to create an energy map of your facility. You can know exactly how much energy is being used in every zone in the building. And that's something that was not easy to do prior to incorporating a lot of this digital technology in the products. And our vision in the future is to have every product that we make exist in real life and also have a digital twin that is residing in the cloud.
And what would the purpose of that be?
So the purpose of the digital twin, there's a lot of purposes of it. On a very basic scale, you would be able to access everything that's happened with that product through its lifespan. Okay, so the day it was manufactured, the day it was shipped,
Where
the day
it's
it was
located.
commissioned,
Yeah.
what parameters were used to commission it, and then what changes have taken place since then. How many cycles it's run. What's the maximum torque it ever achieved. All of that basic product data is now accessible. And we believe that that's where the world's going. You talk about Internet of Things. Digital twins are fundamental to the Internet of Things.
And what's the business? I mean, look, that's cool. There's no question about that. But what's the business benefit to that? Like, what do I get from having that information?
Okay, so it depends on how it's applied. Okay, number one, there could be a business benefit on a very basic sense to be able to go back and let's say there was a building event. Let's say something, you had an air handler freeze up. Okay, being able to access that data as to what was going on right prior to that event, there's some advantage there. But I think the big advantage is having all of that data up in the cloud and accessible to third parties. For example, we're not a building analytics company, okay? We have devices that produce a lot of data, but there are many companies out there that specialize on building analytics, actually looking at all of the accessible data in a building and figuring out ways to make that building operate smarter and more energy efficiently. Okay, well, having that data residing in the cloud and being accessible to others is a huge advantage. Just think of a building analytics company that not only is looking for the data off of the flow control devices in the building, but also might be integrating data from the lighting system and data from the security system and putting together an overall, a digital twin of the entire building. We believe there's huge value in that.
And so one thing we never really got to probably at the start of this, which would have been helpful in framing this all up, is what kind of buildings are Belimo products going into? Like, what are the implementations? Like, they're not going in my house. So
there's not too many of them going in your house. Okay. Where it might go in your house is in a small zone damper device that you probably wouldn't even know exists as the homeowner. But we might sell an actuator to the manufacturer of that zone damper. They would be an OEM customer of ours.
Got it.
That might find its way into your house.
Okay.
The vast majority of our product line would not find its way into your house. So it's commercial buildings. I mean, really, it's anywhere where hot water and chilled water are being applied to air condition. Also,
retail, shopping centers.
well, see, even retail and shopping centers. Certainly, our products are going to be in there, either in the form of devices that are put into the ductwork and into the water piping to do that control, or they might find their way there inside of another manufactured
rooftop
product. Unit or air handler, because those are really our two channels. We sell to a contracting channel, which would be the channel that would be putting it into individual spots in the ductwork and in the piping.
In sort of like large multi-tenant office buildings, apartment
Exactly.
buildings, things
Yep.
like that.
Yep. And then the other channel would be the OEMs, where it would be a piece of equipment that our things would be inside. But back to the building types, yeah, it's commercial. School systems, K to 12, universities, office buildings.
Data centers.
Data centers are a huge and growing portion of our
I
business.
bet. I was just thinking about the amount of heat and air conditioning fluctuations that they kind of got to deal with, and it's probably a big, and having the data understand it, the uptime requirements and making sure. I bet you that's an opportunity where there's probably really big opportunities there.
The first time I had a data center explained to me, the consulting engineer who was explaining it said, picture a building that's a city block long and a city block wide, and it has no windows, and you fill it with furnaces. And the job with data center cooling is getting that heat out of the building.
Right.
It's just a massive concentrated air conditioning application. And the rate of data center construction is mind-boggling. And again, that's
their mission in life is to pack as many computer processors as they can into that building once it's made, and every one you put in there is just generating more and more heat. So the heat load probably even increases year over year because you're introducing more and more powerful processors that generate even more heat.
That's correct. And the data center operators are very energy conscious. The energy bill is a huge portion of their cost to operate.
You got to be. I mean, the cost of goods has got to be because you got the capital for the building. The servers are purchased by their tenants, right? Not by themselves, generally speaking.
Unless it's an enterprise data center where
true.
Facebook owns the whole thing.
That's true.
But they're looking at this.
But even then, the cost of building the server has to be nothing compared to the cost of operating that thing.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
So they want low energy,
Yeah.
and they want reliability because the cost of going down is astronomical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that fits right into your kind of bailiwick of cheap installation, low cost installation, ease of accessibility and low maintenance. So it's kind of right in the Belimo sweet spot.
It is. We actually we view ourselves as fortunate to have had the data center industry kind of come out of the weeds in the last 25 years because it not to say that the HVAC industry is not a good, viable industry, but it was just kind of like an added growth enhancer to our overall business.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
What about in terms of like the global landscape? It seems like the HVAC industry is really dominated by a small handful of pretty large businesses. And look, 2,000 employees is no slouch by any stretch of the imagination. But I imagine you've only got a small handful of competitors that are probably 10, 20 times the size of the business, at least in employee count wise.
Yeah, globally, I think there are 4 manufacturers who really compete on a global scale, and they're all very, they're well-run companies. Mm-hmm. In terms of those 4 companies, all of them have some overlap on the product ranges that we have, mm-hmm. But in every case, those companies are also focused on a much wider range of products that we're not. Okay, so we really made a decision early on in the evolution of Belimo to focus only on these product categories that I mentioned earlier. There's a term for them in the industry called field devices.
Okay.
And we said, let's just focus on that and not expand our horizons past that. I mean, if we ran out of market to grow into, maybe there'd be a point we'd think about something else. But right now, we still have a lot of market growth opportunity still available in this area, and we concentrate on it. And we don't really set foot outside of the HVAC industry either. That's our industry. When you build actuators, which are little things that turn shafts, there's a lot of industries that use actuators, and we've had a lot of tempting opportunities to go into those industries, and we've avoided saying yes. And again, we're going to stay concentrated on this, keep doing it until we feel there's not additional share opportunity to gain.
It's crazy. It reminds me, I watched a little short video of Johnny Ives, who's a very famous product designer from Apple that worked with Steve Jobs for a long time. I'm sure everyone listening knows what an iPhone is. And it was just a really interesting clip talking about focus. And, he was just talking about one of the things he remembered about Steve Jobs now that he's passed away. It was this idea of focus. Mm-hmm. And he said one of the best things he ever did was said, he would come and say, "Are you focused?" He said, "Yeah, I'm focused." He said, "Are you really focused?" He said, "Okay." He said, "Well, what have you said no to?" And if I couldn't point to some things that I said no to that were amazingly good ideas, like things that you would say, "Wow, that's a tremendous opportunity." If I couldn't point to at least 2 things that I'd recently said no to, and then also say in favor of this other thing that we're staying focused on, that he would really push that I haven't been focused enough. And it just made me think of what you just said. It's focus. People tend to think of focus as, staying focused on a good idea at the exclusion of lesser good ideas. But truly, focus is staying focused on your good idea in the face of all the other million good or theoretically even great ideas that might pop in and out over time. Yeah,
no, that's spot on with the way we think. And another aspect of it is when we look at, we have a product vision for something like this. Part of it is saying, okay, what are we good at? And what are we no better than others at? And when it comes down to the product itself, for example, you see a lot of injected molding parts on our product. And the decision was made many years ago. We could go into the injection molding business because we build 8,000 of these things, 8 million of these things a year. So we've got enough demand
right.
to make use of an injection molding operation, but a quantity of 8 million is peanuts in the injection molding field. Mm-hmm. And are we better doing that ourselves, or are we better partnering with a world-class organization that builds 1,000 times as much as what our demand is going to be, and just do it through a partnership? And we were very, very specific as to what we want to do versus others. And you heard me say earlier, we don't cut a lot of metal down in Danbury. We don't have any reason to believe we can cut metal better than all of the great metal cutters that are out there.
Right.
So let's create partnerships with them and grow together. Let them do what they do best. We'll do what we do best. We're confident we can negotiate a fair price that allows them to have a fair profit and us to have a fair profit. And we concentrated on the things that we really think we can make a difference on.
Jim, that's just tremendous and really, really smart. I know we're a bit out of time here, and I got so many things I want to talk to you about, but maybe I'll wrap it on this, and we'll have to have you come back a second time and we get an update and do some more digging.
Sure.
There's not too many folks, I think, in the space that work for foreign-owned companies that are here in Connecticut, though there are a handful. And Pietro Rosa, I know, has been on the show, and I can think of a few others that aren't escaping my mind at the moment. Mm-hmm. But I just wonder, maybe you could share your experience working, for a foreign-owned company, and what you think that's like for people out there that might be, thinking about what that might be like.
So, I have to say my experience. I can tell you my experience working for Belimo,
right.
and it's the first non-American company I've ever worked for, and it's been a very good experience for me. Okay, I like the way my colleagues think. They don't think that much different at all from me or most of the other the Americans I've gone through my career with. And they're very rational. They think very long term. Everything that we invest in and that we want to get a return on, it's for the long term. It's not for the short term win. And I say that in terms of the way we treat our employees. This is going to sound old fashioned, but when we hire an employee, we would like nothing more than to be that employee's employer for life. We'd like to see them retiring from Belimo. So we have a really good retention rate. We think long-term on their employees. How do we treat them right in order for them to stay with us once they've joined? Where we invest our money in the company, we invest 7% in research and development every year. 7% comes off the top line, right down to R&D. And if you think about an R&D investment, those dollars go in today. It might take 5 years until they evolve into a product that we're going to sell, and take another 3 years before selling that product is profitable. So it's a long-term investment when you're investing in your own organic R&D. And we've done it like clockwork for 50 years. We believe in that. So I would say, for me, working for Belimo has been great. And if that's indicative of a lot of the other foreign-owned opportunities, I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, that's tremendous. Yeah. Jim, I'm going to have to leave it there just on time, but this has been a really tremendous, and I want to go to rapid fire round of questions.
Sure, let's do it.
So you ready for that?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. Red Sox or Yankees?
Yankees.
That hurts. I was on such a good Red Sox streak.
I mean, Danbury. Come on, I can hit
and you're from Long Island,
exactly.
So I had a small hope for Mets. It was maybe
okay. I didn't. You gave me just a binary choice. It would have been Mets. Believe me.
It would have been Mets. Yes. All right, fair enough. Starbucks or Dunkin'?
Dunkin'.
Staycation or exotic destination?
The last 2 years, staycation. I'd love an exotic destination right now. Yeah.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Sports car or SUV?
SUV.
Do you have a favorite business book?
No. I don't.
All good. If you could do anything, anything in the whole wide world, and it had to be something other than be president of Belimo Americas, what would you do?
I'd be Neil Armstrong.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. What's something, Jim, that you learned early in your life or early in your career that you think's helped propel you to all the success you've had?
There's no such thing as a shortcut that you don't pay for in the long run.
No such thing as a shortcut you don't pay for in the long run. Yeah, well, that believing in that definitely shows why you believe in that long-term thinking. It pays off. What's something that you learned later in your career, Jim, or later in your life, that if you could go back in time and tell young Jim, and if he'd listened to you, you think it'd really help propel him?
Yeah. The people and the sincerity of people is more important than the idea. And if you've got the right people who are committed, they don't need to be the sharpest people in the organization. They can get you to the right solution as long as they've got an open mind and they can work together.
Yeah, so teamwork,
Yeah.
teamwork, commitment. It's everything.
Yeah.
It's everything. Jim, it's been really awesome having you on the show and learning about Belimo and everything you guys are doing. Certainly appreciate you taking your time.
Ari, thanks so much for the opportunity.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by CompassMSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.